Hi everyone and welcome to the Latte Lounge. I'm delighted to introduce my very special guest today, who I'm sure is a very familiar face to many of you watching. Kirsty Lang is a BBC radio broadcaster and freelance journalist, has regularly been a writer for the Sunday Times and presenter and reporter for Channel 4 News. And the reason why I wanted to introduce you all to Kirsty today is because, as many of you know, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month and Menopause Awareness Month. And Kirsty, obviously I want to talk to you about your own story, but first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be on. I'm a big admirer of what the Latte Lounge does.
Thank you, Kirsty. So I'm going to just tell everyone a quick summary of your story, and then I'd love you to obviously elaborate. So in 2016, Kirsty was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. At the age of 53, she's been on HRT for 3 years after suffering from frequent hot flushes, from mood swings, weight gain, night sweats and insomnia. A lot of symptoms which I myself also suffered, and a lot of people who are watching are going to relate to. And then the moment Kirsty was diagnosed with breast cancer, her surgeon advised her to stop taking HRT. And in the 2 years that followed that, Kirsty's menopausal symptoms returned with a vengeance. So after surviving breast cancer, there was a huge cost to the quality of Kirsty's life. And I know, Kirsty, you attended a lecture given by Dr. Avram Blooming, who we actually interviewed last week. And it was through talking to Avram that you decided to resume HRT whilst taking tamoxifen, which is a drug which blocks, for those of you who don't know, hormone receptors on cancer cells. So Kirsty, obviously, thanks for giving up your time to talk to us today. Talk to me, take me back to the beginning. When did you first start noticing perimenopause or menopause symptoms?
I think probably when I was about sort of 47, 48. And I think the first manifestation was sleep. I'd always been a really good sleeper. I mean, I'd had periods in my life of stress or, when I was pregnant or whatever, and I didn't sleep so well. But on the whole, I was a pretty good sleeper. And I'd started to wake up in the middle of the night. And started to get hot flushes only at night, not that often, but occasionally. So that was the first sign. And also I was kind of flying. I'm a pretty equable person, fairly easygoing, and I had started flying off the handle with members of my family, and indeed at work, unfortunately, just overreacting. And my husband had started to say, "Are you okay? You're getting very angry about not very important things." So I think those were really the first signs. Now, my mother had had a really hard menopause, and I remember as a teenage girl, and I'm one of 3 girls, and when she was at the height of her menopause, she then went on HRT. We would all steptoe around the house going, "Ooh, mum, hormones," So I kind of knew what was happening. So I'd seen it before. I was a little worried about going on HRT because I'd read about the link with cancer. My maternal grandmother had died of breast cancer in her early 50s, so I knew it was there was a hereditary link. On the other hand, my mother had been on it for years and was fine and got herself regularly checked up. So as things started to get worse and worse, I thought, okay, right, I'm going to go on HRT. Initially, I went to my GP, who was somewhat reluctant to prescribe it to me, and then gave me a list of things like black cohosh and, evening primrose, all of which I tried, but they just didn't really have an impact on it. And eventually, after much begging, I got my GP to refer me to a menopause clinic at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and there I was put on HRT, and it was life-changing. Just kind of within about 2 weeks, I was like, yes, I feel so much better. I feel like my old self. And the other thing, I think I'd suddenly put on a whole lot of weight. I really and all around my middle, just kind of classic, which was upsetting, as it is for all of us. So, the combination of lack of sleep, feeling fat, biting my partner's head off, it wasn't great. And also at work, you feel awful at work when, I work with a, much younger team of people, and they're all really hardworking, and I admire them. And so I just didn't like, biting their head off. And it's easy to do with live broadcasting because it's quite stressful and things can go wrong. But I didn't like the person that I was turning into. So after I got the HRT, I felt much better. And then, happily rocked along for about 3 years until I went for a routine mammogram.
Right. So I was going to ask you actually, I was going to actually ask you at what point you discovered you had breast cancer and how was that diagnosed?
It was a routine mammogram that I was called up for because I was over 50, the one that you go for every 3 years, and I couldn't feel a lump or anything. I thought I was absolutely fine, and they found a couple of small lumps in my left breast through the mammogram. In fact, even when I knew they were there, I couldn't feel them. Right. Then went back for a biopsy. And one of them was cancerous. But I was fortunate, it was fairly early on. But I remember that very clearly, that first meeting with the surgeon when he diagnosed me with breast cancer, because one of the first things I said was, "Is it because of the HRT?"
Yeah.
No, I just thought, oh God. And he sort of said, probably not. It's probably other factors. But he then said, however, you've got to stop it immediately because it'll be acting like a fertilizer on your tumor, which was a horrible image, Yeah. So I went home and threw out all my, patches and progesterone pills and so on.
So you were immediately it was immediately recommended that you come off it, go cold turkey. Did you ask any questions? Also, were you told there any implications of that? What would happen?
None at all.
No.
None at all. I mean, just said cold turkey, just stop now.
Yeah.
And then because I had the biopsy revealed it was quite an aggressive cancer. It was growing very fast. That my surgeon suggested actually that I go straight on to letrozole, which is a breast cancer drug given to postmenopausal women, in the hope that this, while they were waiting to operate, that this might actually stop the tumor from growing, which it did actually. It managed to shrink it a bit. But letrozole literally sucks all the estrogen down your body. So I'd stopped the HRT and I was on it, and straight away I started feeling pretty awful. I mean, terrible. Like it was like a kind of turbocharged menopause.
Oh gosh.
And I was having hot flushes. I mean, probably like 2 an hour. My sheets were wet at night. I was having to change them. It was really awful.
Were you able to work throughout that time, or were the symptoms just so bad?
Well, I did work, but it was hard, and again, it was just awful if I was in a work meeting and I'd have to kind of like, I could feel I had to sort of really be careful about the sort of clothes I wore. Like, for instance, today I'm wearing a silk shirt. I would never have worn this to the office because I knew that there'd be sort of sweat patches appearing all over me. It's awful.
Yeah.
So that's terrible. Yeah. I remember doing I would chair quite a lot of conferences, and it was one of them where your face is put onto a large screen. I remember looking up at the last screen and literally seeing sweat coming down my forehead.
Oh my God.
It was not a good look.
No. So if you don't mind me asking, what treatment did you need to have for the breast cancer in order to sort of get better?
Well, first of all, I had the first surgeon I went to who diagnosed me suggested that I would need a lumpectomy. Fortunately, not that they would be able to just remove the lump, and probably 4 to 6 weeks of radiotherapy, and then they wouldn't know until they opened me up whether I needed chemo or not to see whether it had spread. So the first thing I kind of heard was, 4 to 6 weeks of radiotherapy. That sounds like quite a long time. But I had heard actually through a friend of this new treatment, which is available in some parts of the country, called intraoperative radiotherapy, where you just have one blast on the tumour bed during the operation. So I changed surgeons, found a surgeon who would do that on me. It meant actually going to Swindon, where they have one of the machines, but that's okay. Actually, my mum lives quite close to Swindon, so
Yeah.
I could go and convalesce with her afterwards. So I opted for that, which was great because it meant that, you know, I got the radiotherapy out in one go. Unfortunately, it revealed that the cancer had jumped to one of my lymph nodes, only one, but that raised the question about chemo. I didn't have to have it, but my oncologist felt that it would be advisable. So I opted for that. So in the end, I had a lumpectomy, intraoperative radiotherapy, and chemo. I had Taxol, which you can get on a weekly basis for something like 12 weeks. So I didn't have a full course of chemo. I had sort of chemo light, but nonetheless, it was pretty grim, and I lost half my hair. Got a wig, very good wig, which was important.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that things. And then I continued on letrozole, which I struggled with actually a lot because of the menopausal symptoms, but also I had this very, very stiff joints. I felt like I had become a little old lady overnight. I would crawl out of bed mornings, just kind of like I felt bent. And this went on really for 2 years. It was pretty miserable. I thought to myself, I've survived breast cancer, but is this it? Is this what I'm left with? It was quite depressing.
And so when did you hear, so when did you go and hear or Avram talk, and what was it that he said that made you think, all right, you know, I need to do something about these symptoms?
Well, it was actually my surgeon, the second surgeon, Professor Jay Vadia, who I love dearly and is a great man. And he actually was one of the people who originally invented intraoperative radiotherapy, and was very open-minded actually about when discussing HRT. He wasn't that keen on the idea, but had an open mind. Anyway, he invited me to a conference. And actually, sort of in my capacity as a journalist and somebody who chairs panels, asked me if I would chair a couple of events at it, and I said, yeah, absolutely, that would be great. And Avram Blooming was one of the first people to give a speech, and he talked about how he had prescribed both his wife and his daughter HRT, even though they'd had breast cancer. And I just sat there thinking, oh my God. This is incredible. You mean, in fact, I went up to him afterwards and said, do you mean I could take it? And he said, look, you're not my patient. But I would certainly look into it. At which point my surgeon and Avram, they knew each other. They started exchanging information and so on. But one of the conclusions that my surgeon came to is he said, look, let's switch you from letrozole, which you're having, which just blocks estrogen full stop, drains it out of your body. Let's switch you to another drug, tamoxifen, which is usually given to premenopausal women, but it doesn't really matter. That works in a slightly different way because that blocks the receptors on the cancer cells. So you'll still be getting the estrogen. It just means that when the cancer cells come along, they won't be able to, kind of feed off it, I suppose, is a way.
And so you, what did you go straight back on HRT, within days of that?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And what did people around you think you were crazy or try and persuade you otherwise? Or were you very much, I'm only, this is my life and I'm only going to listen to my doctor and make this decision with him?
Well, I'm really fortunate because I'm a journalist. So I thought, do you know what? I'll use this as an excuse to write an article. I actually wrote an article for the Mail on Sunday health pages, which I'd written for before. So I use this as and it's a very, you know, privileged position to basically go around and interview all sorts of experts around the country on HRT and cancer. And I was surprised how receptive they were to me going back on HRT. I mean, my friends and, you know, lay people were horrified. Yeah. But actually, when I started talking to, you know, the experts, and let me just preface out there, there's very little research into any of this, so it's quite difficult. It's not like there's kind of a peer-reviewed paper that sort of, you know, has followed a number of patients like me who've had breast cancer and then got HR and HRT, and a cohort who haven't. Unfortunately, that research is not out there. But you know, there are bits and pieces, and so I talked to enough people, including the wonderful Dr. Louise Newsome, who runs a menopause clinic, one of the only menopause clinics in the country, and she had actually been at that original conference. Yeah. So I made the journey up to Stratford-upon-Avon to see her. I talked to several other people on the phone. I talked to my oncologist. I talked to my surgeon. And at the end of it, after, I suppose, several weeks of doing interviews and research, I got Louise Newsome to prescribe me HRT, and that's what I'm continuing to do. After that, my GP was prepared to prescribe it. So now it's prescribed through my GP, because she was then supplied with letters by Louise Newsome and by my surgeon and oncologist, all of whom agreed. So it was a bit of a journey, and I think, look, I know that I'm still taking a little bit of a risk, but I think it's a really important thing when you're thinking about something like this to weigh up risk. I remember one of the experts I spoke to sort of said, you know, think of a dot on think of a chart with like 1,000 dots on it, you know, and out of 1,000 women, you know, I'm now going to get the figures wrong, but let's say, you know, sort of, you know, 20 of them will get breast cancer, and then, you know, so imagine sort of 20 red dots in 1,000, and then you know, imagine if those women drink more than they should, then they're increasing their risk by, and she added a few more dots. Imagine if they're overweight. Yeah. That sort of doubles your risk, you know. And then if you had the HRT, so actually, in fact, being overweight and having breast cancer and HR, you know, is more dangerous than drinking, and the drinking. So it's about kind of, you know, if you're prepared to, you know, watch your drinking, stay healthy, stay slim, regulate all those other things over which you do have control, then maybe you can afford to take that extra little bit of risk.
And it's so interesting talking to you, because you know, in the same way that your privilege is you're a journalist and you're very used to doing your research and reaching out and finding experts. I mean, my privilege is, obviously, as you know, I'm the daughter of Professor Michael Baum, who actually Jay, who you went to see, has taken over Dad's clinic. So I've had the luxury, but for the first 4 years of not knowing or recognizing what my perimenopause symptoms were, you know, it took 4 years for actually, you know, my dad to sort of say, actually, it's this. And then for me to then shoot off and find all these experts. And obviously Louise Newsome is one of our experts who writes for our website, as you know, so is Dad and Jay. But, you know, for women all over the country who don't have any of these contacts or privileges, we hear from them day in, day out. They are struggling to first even recognize what's wrong with them. Then it's easier for them to understand a sensationalized headline in the Daily Mail saying, don't take HRT. And that headline and all the headlines that their friends will read sticks with them forever. And it, you know, and this is all because of this flawed report that we all know about now, the Women's Health Initiative. But it's just so heartbreaking that women have to spend years suffering like you have, and me less so, but still, to have to find this information. And you know, funny enough, I was discussing with my father last night, you know, that we were going to chat today, and he was saying just this, that you know, you have to constantly weigh up benefits versus harms. You know, medicine's about quality of life and length of life. And this latest, there's a Montgomery judgment, which you know about, that from, I think it's November the 9th, the General Medical Council are going to basically insist that all doctors have to have these informed conversations with their patients. It's a legal right to understand, in the same way you did with the sort of dots, exactly what your risks are, to be able to make these decisions, because otherwise women are just going to be terrified and lead pretty awful lives. So, you know, it's great that you were informed. I'm really, obviously I'm delighted you feel so much better. I mean, there's a lot of women who are going to be watching this, Kirsty, who are following your journey and are going down a similar route. What are your sort of take-home messages to them, what you've learned along the way, and what you would advise them to do?
Well, I think, you know, this is all very personal. I mean, I probably have quite a high threshold when it comes to risk. I was prepared to take you know, a risk of slightly increased risk of my cancer coming back in order to have a better quality of life. Now, that's incredibly personal, because I have friends who've had breast cancer and they're utterly haunted by it coming back. Of course, you're always frightened it's going to come back. I mean, I should say that, you know, statistically, it's most likely to come back in the first couple of years. I'm now 4 years in. I go for regular checkups. You know, I am pretty careful about, you know, weight, drink, things like that. I do still drink wine, but less than I did. So I think there's, you know, there's that. I think the bigger picture is what I say, and I think we've all learnt this in the time of Corona, is that there are many scientific opinions. You know, there isn't just one truth. If you're going out there thinking there's, you know, somebody is going to tell you there is one way of doing this, there is one way of looking after yourself, you're not going to find that person. You know, as we're seeing with Corona, and the same is with breast cancer, and the same with HRT. You'll get a variety of different opinions from the doctors and experts that you talk to, and part of it is having the courage to take that decision yourself about what's right for you, and what makes you feel better. And for me, I just felt that my life had become too miserable off HRT, and you know what? I just felt deep inside that it wasn't doing me any good. You know, I had stiff joints, I was getting older, I was getting overweight, I looked terrible on the letrozole and no HRT. I really, you know, okay, I'd been through chemo and stuff, but it wasn't getting much better. And I just feel so much better. And you know, the more I read about the reducing the risks, I've got several friends who after breast cancer, and they got into their 60s, they got osteoporosis.
Yeah,
that's a big concern for me. You know, you've got to bring that into the equation. Heart disease is a big killer of women. Bring that into the equation alongside the breast cancer. So it's really a personal choice, but you know, I think it's about having the courage to go to your doctor and say, and I think this is where so many menopausal breast cancer survivors don't feel bad complaining about how they feel afterwards. They go, "Oh, I've survived. I should be grateful."
Yeah.
And also, I'm not often I'm quite a frank person, and I remember my oncologist being quite surprised when I said to him one day, "Do any of your female patients, your breast cancer survivors, I mean, do they talk about what's happened to their sex life since treatment?" And he said, ruffling a few papers,
Yeah.
"Why do you ask?" Which I think I'd rather. And I said, well, because, you know, I have terrible vaginal dryness, urinary tract infections, and, you know, I'm kind of feeling at the age, you know, of my mid-50s that my sex life is sort of over. And you know, this has implications to my marriage, and I'm worried about it. And I just wondered what you say to them. And actually at that point, this is I think something worth knowing, is he said, well, I can absolutely prescribe you estrogen pessaries, because that won't have any effect, you know, on your breast. That's absolutely fine. And that did make quite a big difference. But he never brought it up. Nobody ever brought it up with me. I had to, and I think a lot of women would be really embarrassed to bring that up with their doctor, but it's particularly a male one. And so I do wish, actually, I think we all need to educate our doctors, we need to educate our friends, we need to educate our family. I talk about menopause at a drop of a hat, and my counselor, because I think it's really important, because it's this silence, this climate of silence that women have suffered, you know, silently for all these years. That's why I think so many male members of the medical profession are quite ignorant of just how much suffering goes on.
Well, look, I think that's absolutely right, and that's why I set up the website, and we interviewed a lady, Jane Lewis, on earlier on this week, about she's written a book called Me and My Menopausal Vagina, which my boys are so embarrassed to see hanging around my house. But the point is that the more women that talk about this, you know, healthcare professionals are not trained in menopause education at all, which is shocking. But we have Diane Danzybrink, who set up the Make Menopause Matter campaign to hopefully to change that. But you know, we're all obviously out there talking about it, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think you know, what I learned last week from Avram and from my father is that 90%, and I'm pretty sure this is right, but 90% of all breast cancers which are now diagnosed are actually curable, and women end up, you know, dying from other things. And as you've said, osteoporosis, heart disease, dementia, and those are three bigger killers than breast cancer, and HRT actually can prevent all those three, or at least reduce the chances. So, you know, look, it's a very complicated subject. I'm so happy that you're well, and you've been able to and willing to share your journey with us. And my take-home message to everyone watching this is, find a menopause specialist, or, you know, if you're going through breast cancer, an oncologist who knows a lot about the subject, and sit down with them and look at the absolute benefits, you know, but as opposed to the relative risks. Look at these decision aids and just make this decision with someone who knows. So,
I think that's nice.
Thank you so much, and be well, and you know, good luck with everything, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, take care.